Welcome to We Are Women, Unapologetically, the podcast that talks about the good, bad, ugly, and awesome. Careers, life transitions, confidence, and everything in between. Because shift happens, but you don't have to do it alone.
Welcome to We Are Women Unapologetically. I am your host, Jessica Cumming, and I am so grateful today to have Erris Klapper with us. She is an amazing woman that I found through this podcast. And as Erris will tell you, life is full of transitions. Some are expected, others disruptive, and many of them are deeply transformative. Erris's journey is a testament to the courage it takes to listen to your inner voice, even when the world around you resists. She began her professional life as an attorney only to find herself burned out and unfulfilled. When she made the bold decision to exit the legal field, she faced pushback from colleagues, friends, and family. Stepping away opened a door to a series of meaningful transitions. Erris found joy and purpose through volunteering, pro bono legal work, and using her business expertise as well as life expertise to coach individuals with varied career paths. Her passion for communication and helping others led her to freelancing writing, where she published over 100 articles that have been featured in numerous media outlets, including the Huffington Post, Cosmopolitan, Redbook, Good Housekeeping, Women's Day, Yahoo News, Country Living, Esquire, House Beautiful, and many more. She also co-founded a consulting firm, but her desire to deepen her understanding of human behavior in the workplace propelled her back to school to study industrial and organizational psychology. That's where she focused on helping individuals overcome imposter syndrome and rewrite their self-narratives. Erris became a certified professional coach, honing the skills she used for 2 decades. Today, through her own business, she helps professionals navigate executive presence, communication, and mitigate the impact of imposter syndrome. Erris, thank you so much for joining me today.
I appreciate being here with you, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. So you have quite a background. Why don't you tell me a little bit of some of the transitions that you've been through and what you've learned from those transitions?
I think that my biggest transition, leaving the legal field, fell on me rather than me taking the step. I'd love to tell your listeners that I had the guts and saw the light, but I didn't. I was working. My husband was working. Our lives were crazy. I had 2 little children at home and a wonderful nanny who was also moonlighting and working in a nursing home at night. And in her last few months with us, we noticed she was tired. She had also just gotten a driver's license. She was sleeping through the day on the couch, as reported by my babies, driving them to school. It became a completely untenable situation for everyone involved. She was too tired. I was too scared. I was missing major milestones. And I wasn't enjoying my work. And she gave me the push to make a change. She was working at night to better herself and do something that she wanted to do. And I was leaving my kids every single day to do something that I had no passion in. And so I asked her, "Are you quitting on me?" And she said, I love you and I love the children, but I am. My husband and I sat down and we figured it out. And I left the law firm that I was working at, which also wasn't easy.
How long ago was that you left the law firm?
I left in the early 2000s. It was after 9/11 in New York, which also put a twist on things for us and changed our priorities. But I was met with a lot of resistance when I told my boss that I was resigning. She said, "You're not resigning. You're going to have to rethink that decision. Please leave my office and let's just pretend this didn't happen." She was very upset. And when I spoke to some of the male partners to say that I was leaving because I wanted people to hear it from me, I was met with a lot of, "You're throwing your life away. You're throwing your career away." In my family culture, there was no such thing as women not working and not being educated and not using their education. And there wasn't a lot of recognition of the fact that law school was pushed on me. It wasn't my choice in the first place. I was a psychology major. So it took me 30 years to get back to what I wanted to do in the first place and what my calling was.
It's really interesting that you say that because I know in one of the previous episodes, I talked about the handcuffs that it's what you're supposed to do. It's what everyone
Yes.
expects of you. It is not what you're passionate about.
I know that you talk a lot about the golden handcuffs and the legacy and the perfectionism and the procrastination, and usually one of those keeps people doing what they're doing. For me, it was all three.
Yeah, and I went through something very similar. It was the legacy, it was golden handcuffs, it was the one more certification before I did something else. I think that's something very similar in our stories that we did go through all three. That's something women don't necessarily hear enough about because they're categorized in one thing or another. You had mentioned how your female boss reacted versus your male colleagues. And her saying basically this conversation didn't happen. That shocks me.
Me too.
But then at the same time, to have your male colleagues say you're throwing your life away. Was there a point where you thought maybe I shouldn't do this?
Yes, every minute of every day, because there was no support around this concept. I was a woman who went to law school in 1990 in New York, and my entire identity was tied up in being a lawyer. I didn't know back then that your entire identity isn't tied up in work, it's tied up in your personal values and everything you care about and everything that you bring to the table. And I spent a long time feeling resentful that I went to law school in the first place. And now I'm really grateful that I went to law school because I bring those skills every single day. Once I found my passion and I was able to align it with what I think is my purpose in life, I was able to shed some of that resentment and I didn't even realize it was happening. It just sort of lifted. And when I tell people that I'm coaching, the reaction from people who know me is unanimously, you've been coaching your whole life. So I find that very interesting because people must have seen that that was my purpose. My door was always open to those kinds of conversations, to being mentored, to being a mentor. So I think that I naturally gravitated towards that. I knew that I didn't want to be a therapist, but a coach is very different. And it really, really feels right. I knew that I was waking up in the morning with no passion and wasn't making a huge difference for anybody or anything at work. But now I wake up every single day and I know that whatever I'm researching, whatever I'm reading, whatever I'm working on is going to help people. And that makes a huge difference for me.
And it's so much more than a job title that you
Mhm.
walked away from, but it's so much more than a job title that you walked into. Did you go directly from being a lawyer into coaching, or did you take some time off to be with the children?
I did take some time off. I was dealing with the emotional fallout of the extended family on weekends saying, what are you going to do? What's your plan? How long are you going to be off? I mean, is this 6 months? It ended up being 10 years. But in that 10-year period, and we've talked about this, it's the gap in my resume. So that gap is comprised of the most interesting things that I did because I had time and I wanted to explore. I was coaching people working on pro bono legal projects that interested me and that I cared about. I was reading a ton. I attended seminars and classes. I volunteered. I felt like I was just open to making a difference in others, but also in myself and figuring out what my next step is going to be. That gap ended up being a very, very full gap. Eventually, a friend challenged me to say out loud what I want to do. I was afraid to say it because even now when I look at people's LinkedIn profiles and I see author, I don't think of myself as an author and people will say, you've published a lot. I'm working on a second, probably third draft of a manuscript now on the years that I grew up in South Africa. And I still can't bring myself to say that, which could be the imposter syndrome. But my friend challenged me and I did it. I started learning about pitching editors, editing. I joined classes and groups and connected with different people. It really filled my heart. Writing is just a part of me. I carve out time every single day and on the weekends to still do that. I was coaching people, helping people find their own voices, which spilled into life transitions. I was helping with college essays and graduate school essays and career advice. So it became a very natural step to co-found a consulting firm. But what I found in those years is that I really wanted to hone in on something very specific, which was just the coaching aspect. I do consult and I love consulting, but it ties in with who I coach and how I coach. And so taking that step of going back to school and then getting certified so that I can formally say that I'm a certified coach was very important for me.
I think it's one of those things where, regardless of what we do in life, we always want to make others proud. To anyone that currently has a gap on their resume, do you have any advice or any suggestions of what they say or how they explain it?
My advice is lofty, and I know that when I say this, there will be someone out there that says, well, that's easier said than done. But my advice is to own it, to have the gap, because women have children. This is a wonderful reality of life for those who choose it. And I don't think we should make excuses. And I think that we should normalize the gap, because the gap is really that time that you take for yourself to figure out who you are, what your identity should be, what you value, what you care about. That's the place where we can dare to dream. If you don't have that time to really decide, I mean, we're never distraction free, but that space to explore that, life just passes us by. My biggest fear is stagnation. So I would tell someone, don't be afraid to dream, be afraid to stagnate and dream big. That gap allows that. And that gap can be an afternoon. It doesn't have to be 10 years. It doesn't have to be filled with anything in particular. It's really just about that self-discovery and self-care. And when we engage in that, we have so much more to give others.
Yeah, I really love that point of owning it. There's going to be people out there that say, I need to be able to explain to employers when I'm trying to get back into the workforce, talk about what you've done in that time. It doesn't matter why the gap happened. Women go out on maternity leave. You have fathers that go out on paternity leave,
Sure.
even, but then you have layoffs. And right now we're experiencing a lot of that. I have some really great friends that have been laid off for over a year now. And I'm talking successful people that were making significant incomes and now are having problems finding work. And so when I was talking to them, I said, you can talk about the things that you're doing. You're volunteering at your children's school. You are learning new things, getting caught up on AI and how that's going to impact us going forward. Because so many people are going to have to be reskilled by showing the things that you are doing versus what you're not doing. And even if you don't put it on your resume, but in a cover letter, that's something that I've told people is own it. You can own it on your resume, but it does sometimes throw up a red flag. And so what can you do to mitigate that? Own it. I think that it's important to be okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about how at first you didn't know what you wanted to do, and this was a transformation period.
Mm-hmm.
You had to go through the entire grieving process. Once you made this decision, you also had to figure out what's next from a different lens. You did it from a lens of what's the best thing for me and my family, but not necessarily what others would think.
You just hit on the most difficult part, because I had trouble bridging the gap between the expectations and what I wanted. I think that's probably the most important part, being true to yourself, finding your passion, aligning it with your purpose. When it makes sense and when it feels right, it's then going to resonate. You can't go by somebody else's definition of success. Just as having to explain a gap in the resume to an employer, you probably don't want to work for a company that cannot understand basic humanity. A company that can't understand that and expects that you worked every single day from the moment you graduated with no intermission and no time for yourself is a company that's also going to make demands that you're not going to be able to meet. It does sound idealistic, but that's not going to ultimately align with a person's goals. It's not going to ultimately make sense, and it's not going to be a lasting career move. People change jobs for many reasons. People need the paycheck, which of course makes sense, and take whatever job they can. That doesn't mean we don't keep reaching for the stars and not settling.
We grew up in a generation where you ultimately got a job and stuck with that company. And now we're seeing that completely shift. This is not a new shift. I'd say at least over the last decade, you see younger generations come in, they'd work for a little bit, have their minimum time, and then move to a new role, figuring out what works for you as soon as possible and where your passion and purpose aligns is truly important. And in Europe, after high school, they encourage the college kids to take a year off before they actually enter college and to travel. I wonder if we did more of that in the US and we encouraged people to take the time to really figure out who they are, where they want to be, how it would change them as people, how it would change us as a society, as well as a nation. The thing that keeps resonating in my head is the transformation happens in the trenches. That gap time is almost like our trenches because you are battling not only yourself and trying to figure out what you want, but you are battling the expectations of everyone else. You're battling what is my purpose? What really is my passion? How are people going to look at me? Am I going to be accepted?
I think the other thing we battle is being a good role model. I have a son and a daughter, and that inner dialogue in my head all the time was, what am I modeling for her? Am I modeling for her to not go to school, not get an education, not be focused in a career, and then stay at home? Fairly early on, I realized that what I'm showing her is that circumstances aside, because that was a time when we were able to do that. It's a privilege. I had the privilege of being able to do that, and I know that. I wanted my daughter to know that if you follow your passion, you can reinvent yourself. My children remember me being a lawyer. There was one day where I put on a suit to go somewhere, and my son said to me, "Are you going back to work?" I said, "Why do you think that?" And he said, "Because you look like a lawyer." And my children saw me as a lawyer, and then my children saw me as a writer for many years. And I had my computer with me all the time. When I sat on the sidelines waiting for sports practices to end, I was writing, and they saw that. They lived through that with me. Now, my third career, I hesitate to call coaching that because I've probably been coaching for 20 years. But formally, starting my own business, this is the second business that I've started. What I've modeled for them is that you don't really have to follow the path. You have to follow your passion. You have to figure out your purpose, follow your passion, and whatever that is, you can do it. That wasn't just true for what I was modeling for my kids. It's true for all the women out there because our struggles come in many different permutations. It doesn't mean that we can't help each other and lift each other up. When I say dare to dream, I don't say that because I'm idealistic. I say that because it starts with a spark. with an idea, with figuring out what's good for you and figuring out how you can get there.
You have done such a transition from being a lawyer to writing. And I often talk to women that are wanting to take more time for themselves. They're wanting to write. They're wanting to be able to journal their day. They want somewhere to start. Would you have any advice if someone's wanting to start, but they don't know where or how?
I guess it's a two-part answer. For writing, I would get connected with writing groups, read all the craft books out there, or at least peruse the section at the bookstore, and try something called morning pages. Basically, you open your computer and just write, unedited. Try to shut the voice in your head out and just write. Don't worry about how it sounds. It's very cathartic and helpful in terms of the learning process. There are many books that I love about writing, and we can put a link to that. As far as finding your passion, I kind of knew what mine was because many decades ago, I majored in psychology. I was very interested in the human mind and why we do what we do. Even the area of law that I practiced in, trust and estates, was very hands-on, very family-oriented, very client-centered. In terms of finding it, I think that it's just a question of being true to yourself, shutting out the noise. When we walk without headphones and without our phone and without distractions and we're out there, it'll come. You also have to have your eyes open because when you're very bogged down with, I hate this, it's not working out for me, this is not how I thought my life would be, my job stinks, we become very closed off to opportunities. And when we say, I don't know what my passion is, but I am now committed to finding it, truly making that your mantra, opening up your eyes and your heart. I had an opportunity come my way that I wouldn't have even seen as an opportunity when I first started writing if I was very closed off to it.
I want to reiterate that because being open to opportunities and having your eyes open for them, that really resonates. Oftentimes we overlook or think, I'm not ready, I shouldn't look at doing that. But those little things happen for a reason. Once you're willing to acknowledge that, big things happen. How did you go from your second to your third career, from being a parent to ultimately being a coach and opening your own business?
My brother and I started thinking about having our own consulting firm, and we co-founded the firm. And we were working with lots of small and large medical practices mostly. I found that when I was going in and speaking to people, consulting on what was going right and what was going wrong and the improvements we could make using my legal and psychology background, I realized where exactly my passion was. It materialized for me, and I wanted more. I had the perception and the intuition, but I wanted the language, tools, and education behind me. And so I decided to take a step back, stay on as an advisor, but really go back to school and do a deep dive because I like that. I liked evidence-based practices. I like to read the literature, see the studies, and understand. That was very important for me. I knew that I would also become certified as a coach to make sure I wasn't missing anything in my coaching sessions to round me off. And also because I am the consummate student, I'm not even sure that I'm done now. Learning really is a passion for me, and I like to find the why. That's how it developed. I also wanted to take my practice into coaching professionals around professional issues because we spend most of our lives at work. I'm fascinated by the psychology of work, why workplaces do the things they do, and why individuals behave the way that they behave.
When you made the decision to look at going back to school for psychology, you were making a huge commitment and you were really looking at developing these transferable skills. So Can you talk to me a little bit about that journey to go back to school, what that looked like?
So I think that's an excellent question. And I love that you mentioned transferable skills because when I made the decision to go back to school, I felt that I had none. I didn't realize. I was fascinated by psychology, and it was a coming home moment for me. Industrial and organizational psychology is the psychology of work, so it's a very distinct master's program. I knew that I wanted more, but I didn't realize that being a writer and writing so much every day was going to help me. Each class, I think I had about 15 essays, including these weekly assignments, and that part was not difficult for me. But I didn't know that before I started. And I applied, I got in, and before I started, I panicked and I pulled out. I called my advisor. I said, I'm sorry, I changed my mind. I said, I'm quitting. And she talked me through it, and we decided I would just start with a certificate program, which would be a certificate in IO psychology. And about halfway into my first class, I realized that I have transferable skills, which is why I love that you're mentioning that. I could write. I had life experience. I could speak. I could make a presentation. I did go to law school, which wasn't the easiest thing that I had done. And I lived a little. And I was able to take all of those things and say, not only can I do it, but I want to do it. And I really do have a passion for learning. So I called her back up and I said, put me back in. So she re-enrolled me in the master's. And I probably was the only person that went into my capstone thesis class super excited because I'd been gathering all this research all along on imposter syndrome. And I couldn't wait to write. And I was probably very annoying when I wasn't relieved to graduate because I wanted to stay in school forever. So maybe that's definitely not realistic, but I had skills that transferred and worked, and I was able to use them. And I think that that's what made it a little bit not just palatable, but enjoyable for me.
So, was this master's program, did you do this full time?
I decided to go full time, to go all in. It was about 20 months, and I was all in. 10-week semesters, so you take whatever you want to take. I'll fully admit that when I took statistics, the first 3 weeks, I called my advisor again, and she said, what, are you dropping out again? And it was really, really hard because I'm not a math person, but it ended up being one of my favorite classes. And I mention that because when we change our attitudes, when we change, we're able to change our minds. We're able to open our hearts to the experience, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's humanity. It's life. I embraced it. I ended up absolutely loving that class. I know that some of my ex-co-students out there are throwing things at the screen right now, but I did. I really, really enjoyed that.
Do you have any advice for anyone that is either looking at going back to school, working full time? Maybe they're in a transition phase and they have this time and they think, yep, I'm going to go back to school. Do you have any advice for them?
Professors told us all the time, don't do it the night before. I couldn't do it the night before because I'm way too anxious to do something like that. Procrastination is a huge hurdle to staying organized. So when you're working and at school, or even if you're just at school and you have more time on your hands than you thought, staying organized, having a goal, a weekly goal, and then a goal for a semester, mapping that out for yourself on your personal calendar. So I would say don't procrastinate and stay organized. My other huge advice is to be engaged. When I went back to school, I knew that I would be focusing on imposter syndrome. And through my studies, I had the opportunity to do a deep dive into all the literature, to do a project that focused on why people have imposter syndrome, who is most likely to develop it, and how we can mitigate Imposter syndrome is not on the DSM-5. It is just a phenomenon. We do the best we can to work with it, and there are ways to mitigate those symptoms and make it easier on highly skilled, proficient, and accomplished individuals. So for me, that passion was born of my own self-doubts and the opportunity to help others feel better around it at work, break the cycle, and move forward is true calling.
I was giving a talk a couple of months ago about imposter syndrome. I was talking about my own battle with it. And someone said to me, "What exactly is imposter syndrome?" Would you like to explain for those that are listening or watching that aren't exactly sure of what it is or how they can overcome it?
Imposter syndrome is a debilitating form of cognitive bias. It's the experience where a person is biased against themselves. The negative self-talk, the fear of being discovered as an imposter, the lack of willingness to step up for opportunities because of the fear, the anxiety, the depression, the physical, the mental manifestations that ensue. That is imposter syndrome. It's very important to note what imposter syndrome is not, because we hear about this all the time. A very famous podcaster, who I'm not going to name, said to a person who was starting a new project, just do it. Just do it and you'll get over it. There's no slogan to help people get over imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is deeply rooted. It really is a belief. It's a cognition. They have to work on understanding why they have it, what their triggers are, and how they can transform their self-talk and break that cycle that they engage in, the automatic thoughts, the amygdala hijacking, in order to mitigate it. And I talk about recovery and mitigation, and I never talk about it going away completely, because I think that there are certain personality types that are predisposed to developing imposter syndrome, but the awareness really helps and goes a very long way. Imposter syndrome is not just beginner's jitters. It's not when you're not sure of how to do something and you say, oh, I'm about to write a book, I've never done that before, or I'm about to step on stage and give a talk, I have imposter syndrome. You've never done it before, so you're a beginner. You've never had that experience before, and there is a certain amount of normal self-doubt.
I completely agree with you. There definitely is a difference between beginning, because the first time you do anything, it's not going to be perfect. And we all know that. For me, when I first decided that I was going to start my own business and I was going to start my podcast, I had that imposter syndrome set in. And it didn't come from just beginning, because I had already been coaching for nearly 20 years in the corporate industry. I knew how to do those things. I went to school for film and television. I was on the radio there. You are thinking about, how am I going to be perceived? How am I going to judge? What are others going to think? You are not hiding behind someone else's name. It's your name. It became very, very real for me. I did quite a bit of research on it. The psychology behind it is very interesting. When you look at going from imposter syndrome to building resilience and trying to essentially rewire your neural pathways, you're not only going in to do the work, you're undoing the work. A lot of people think, I can't do this because of what has happened in my past, or I don't belong, or I'm not qualified. I see this a lot in coaching as well. The fact that someone is able to experience imposter syndrome and work towards overcoming it is huge.
I think of imposter syndrome as both symptoms and severity. It is self-diagnosed. So speaking to someone, for people who have debilitating symptoms, speaking to a coach can really help to mitigate those symptoms and to have a better life. Because these are people that are doing great at work. These are people who are getting promoted. And these are people, 65% of leaders in America have imposter syndrome. There was just a Korn Ferry study done on that. And up to 80% of CEOs have it. So we're talking about highly accomplished individuals who, by all external measures, are the vision of success. They're suffering, and they don't need to. Nobody needs to suffer alone. It's real, and there's help.
I love having this conversation because more people, women in particular, need to understand what it is and how to overcome it. Earlier, you had talked about the burnout that you were experiencing prior to leaving your first role. And you also mentioned the emotional portion that came with it. As someone that's gone through it, do you have any advice for the women out there that need to hear something to help get them through?
The burnout is real. If you're in a job or a career that isn't fulfilling the expectations at work, at home, societal constructs are real. The burnout is very real. I would say you're not alone in this country. I think it's maybe reaching epidemic proportions. Support groups are very important. Listening and being with other people who are experiencing something similar is generally very helpful. I'm not a huge fan of that being the end goal because constantly wallowing in the negativity can be very difficult. So, support groups coupled with getting help, coaching, for some people, therapists, depending upon what's going on, gathering our village around us because we can't do this alone. And whatever that is, our partners, our mentors, our community, volunteering. When you help other people, it also helps rewire your brain a little bit. Giving back definitely helps. Engaging in self-care. And self-care is huge. Taking the breaks, finding work-life balance. When we're burnt out, it's very hard to say to someone, oh, you're burnt out, this is a good time to find your passion. It doesn't happen like that. It's a difficult time in someone's life. But taking those steps of building that community and building the support and being able to voice what's going on along with hope and positivity, what can I do rather than what's not working, I think is a good start.
There's a couple of different things that I took from that. One is having that support system. And for everyone, that's going to look different. Personally, I have gone to therapy. I also have coaches and mentors. All three of them are very different, but all three of them are very important depending on the season that you're at in your life. Mm-hmm. And I think oftentimes people don't want to admit that they have even a coach or a therapist because, as you mentioned earlier, they are very different. If anyone new is listening or watching, when you're looking at a therapist versus a coach, you are talking about a therapist going back into the past traumas, the past things that are holding you back, and trying to work through and undo some of those things that have happened, but you've carried forward. When you're looking at a coach, it's taking you from where you're at today and building out that plan and helping you get to where you want to be. And is there anything that you would add to that when we're looking at the differentiation between a therapist and a coach?
I think that's pretty spot on. I would also add that coaches meet you where you're at now and help. It's goal oriented. So they meet you where you're at. They help you establish your goals, not what the coach thinks you should do, and help you basically manifest and move through that to accomplish the goals. And it can be short term, it can be long term. It's very proactive because it comes from within the person. You know, because you do this, we see some pretty amazing transformations.
Yeah. And that's not to say that these transformations don't stem from something different or something that is a fear-based trauma, something that happened years ago. But the transformation, when you get those aha moments and you get those people that come to you at the end or even during the middle of a session, it's like, oh my gosh, it just hit me.
Yeah.
To hear that happen because we have no idea what that specific thing is that was holding them back. We know it's something, but we're meeting them where they're at, having the conversation, talking through it with them, looking at where they want to ultimately be. That's why I do what I do, and I'm assuming it's the same for you.
And that's why I do what I do. Because when that happens, how do I compare that to pushing more papers on my desk? I wake up in the morning with purpose and passion, and I love what I do. It brings meaning.
And you're making a difference. It may
Mhm.
be one person at a time, or maybe not. I've done some group coaching also, but you're still that one moment, you're impacting lives. When your purpose and passion align, that's one of the ways that you know is that it not only brings joy to you, it brings joy to you because you've brought that joy to others. As we look at wrapping up our time here today, are there any words of advice, last minute thoughts for our listeners or viewers?
I think what really resonates for me from this conversation and our previous conversations, there is a space for normalizing all of this for women. You've created that space. This is the place where change happens because you can realize that you're not alone. You can realize that there are things that you can do. You can reach out for help. Coaches are just human beings fumbling through their own transitions with their own experiences. We're here to sit with you. We're here to listen and create that space where change can happen. No one needs to stagnate. That word scares me more than anything because no one needs to be stuck.
Being stuck is temporary, but staying stuck is a choice.
It is. I want to give a little grace to people who maybe don't know how to pivot. We get stuck with our automatic thoughts and our negative self talk and with our cycles, whatever it is that we each do to ourselves in our own brains. So, normalizing getting help is probably one of the most important parts of the conversation.
Just saying those words, I think, sometimes scares people too. I don't need help. I don't need anyone. I got this.
Everyone needs help.
Exactly. And I think that asking for help should not be scary. Asking for help shows strength, it shows courage, it shows that you are taking control. Thank you for calling that out. I have definitely tried to create a community of women going through similar things. This stemmed from not having a tribe. This stemmed from me having to be on my own for days when I was younger. It stemmed from me not knowing who I could or couldn't trust and being pitted against other women in the workplace. And people ask, why is this podcast geared towards women? And that's the reason. Does that mean that men can't learn? Absolutely not. Does that mean that men shouldn't listen? Absolutely not. Not only do men go through the same things, but once they hear the specific things that women go through, they can learn how to best support them.
And support themselves because it's become more normalized for women to have these conversations, but men still deal with societal constructs, with certain expectations of how they need to be or should be, maybe not show emotion, vulnerability. So I think that this conversation is open to everyone. Everyone
Absolutely.
needs it. It's not even about getting help, it's about we're all going through this. We may as well talk about it and feel better.
Yeah. Might as well have the conversation. It's interesting because as I have been talking to some of the listeners, there have been quite a few men that have reached out, not only just in support of me, but saying how they have gone through some of these things. And whether I knew it or not, I was helping them. Ladies, if you're listening out there, get your men to listen to some of this as well because they are going through it. Ultimately, this may start a conversation in your relationships that hasn't started but needs to because of what we're talking about now and them not necessarily being willing to open up.
I really appreciate being here today with you. and I appreciate the community you've created for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate all your insights in our conversation. And for all of those listening out there, if this has resonated with you, please like, share, tag us in it. Let's start a conversation about the community that we've created. Until next time, stay fierce, stay bold, but most importantly, stay unapologetically you.